The Euphrates River drying up unfolds a lot of hidden, mysterious, ancient archaeological sites leading to amazing discoveries. Today, we stop at the tomb of King Gilgamesh. This tomb was found by archaeologists in Iraq. King Gilgamesh was a historical king of the Sumerian city-state of Uruk during the early part of the Early Dynastic Period, which is 2900–2350 BC. He's the hero of the first written epic, originally in Sumerian about 5,000 years ago and subsequently popular throughout ancient Mesopotamia. This tablet is now regarded as the oldest book in the world. It is the first written literature, so that should tell you a lot about how old it actually is. According to scholars, the Epic of Gilgamesh was written more than 1,000 years before the first verse of the Bible was ever written down anywhere. But surprisingly, the tablet also contains a story about the Great Flood. You know the Noah flood story in the Bible, where the entire human race was wiped out except Noah and his household? How come the flood story first appeared in the Epic of Gilgamesh 1,000 years before it appeared in the Bible? Did the flood happen twice? Let's dive into the basics of the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the story, he starts off as a brave and powerful but brash and tyrannical king who abuses his people. The gods send him a companion, an equally powerful warrior named Enkidu, and their friendship teaches Gilgamesh to be a more responsible leader. Gilgamesh and Enkidu set off on a journey, probably to the cedars of Lebanon, to obtain wood for the city. In treeless Mesopotamia, wood is a precious commodity. They defeat a mythical monster and obtain the treasure, but this attracts the attention of the goddess Inanna, who wants to take Gilgamesh as a lover. Inanna is the ancient Sumerian goddess of love, sensuality, fertility, procreation, and also of war. Inanna does not simply offer to take Gilgamesh as her lover. She proposes marriage to him. "Come, Gilgamesh, be my husband, to me grant your lusciousness. Be my husband, and I will be your wife." Unfortunately, she has a habit of discarding her lovers in unpleasant ways, so Gilgamesh declines. The angry goddess sends a monster called the Bull of Heaven to punish the heroes. Together they defeat the bull, but this is a terrible sacrilege. As punishment, Enkidu is stricken with a wasting disease and dies. Gilgamesh, in his grief, decides to obtain the secret of eternal life by embarking on a quest. Ow, this is where the story gets interesting. Gilgamesh embarks on a quest to find Utnapishtim, the only human ever to become immortal. Utnapishtim was the Sumerian version of Noah. I hope you know the story of Noah in the Bible, right? The survivor of a universal flood who built an ark and saved humanity from annihilation. The Epic of Gilgamesh predates the Bible by around 1,000 years, meaning it was written down 1,000 years before even the first verse of the Bible was ever written down. Let's continue with the rest of the story, but I will come back to the character of Noah known as Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Eventually, Gilgamesh finds Utnapishtim. Gilgamesh fails a test designed to test his worthiness of the gift of immortality, but the holy man takes pity on him anyway and gives him a plant that will restore life and vigor. However, the exhausted hero falls asleep on his way home and the plant is stolen by a serpent, which gains the ability to renew itself by shedding its skin. Heartbroken, the chastened king returns home to his city, sadder and resigned to mortality, yet proud of his achievements as a ruler and a man. Gilgamesh apparently also featured in several other stories. The wonderful thing about this epic is how many modern-day relevant themes it explores for having originated sometime around 2700 BC. It asks the questions, how to become known and respected, how to cope with the loss of a dear friend, how to accept one's own inevitable death. Similarities between the Bible flood story and Gilgamesh. The flood narrative comes from the last of 11 clay tablets. Similarities with the Noachian narrative include divine anger with humans and the building of a multi-decked compartmentalized boat, sealed with pitch, which served to save people and fauna from an exceptional flood. In both legends, ravens and doves were involved in determining when the flood was over. Upon landfall after the flood, a thankful sacrifice was offered to the gods: Gilgamesh, God, Noah. Notwithstanding these similarities, the differences between Gilgamesh and Noah's flood are substantial. Right from the start, Noah's flood narrative is emphatically monotheistic, whereas the whole Gilgamesh narrative revolves around the whims, activities, and reactions of an entire pantheon of gods. All of them seem remarkably fallible, without a trace of holiness, and are more reminiscent of a Wagnerian melodrama than of the Judeo-Christian god. As to specific differences, the Gilgamesh boat was 120 x 120 cubits, whereas the Ark was 300 x 50 cubits. The Gilgamesh boat had 6 decks and was made of wood and reeds with punting poles, construction materials similar to those in recent boats of the Iraqi marshlands. Noah's Ark had 3 decks, was made of cypress wood, and did not use punting poles. The Gilgamesh boat was loaded with gold, silver, beer, oil, wine, family, relatives and craftsmen, reed workers and carpenters, and all the livestock that he had, that is, all the beasts and animals of the field, implying oxen and sheep. The ark was loaded with Noah's 8 family members and all creatures who had the breath of life. The geography of the Gilgamesh flood is implied to be a local river in the early version and a sea in a later version. Some writing indicates that the flooding originated from the Euphrates River. Only in the Noah account is the flood over the entire world. Utnapishtim, the human hero of the Gilgamesh epic, entrusted the closure of the boat's door to his boatmaster Puzuramuri. The door of Noah's Ark was shut by God himself. In the Gilgamesh story, the flood lasted 6 days. In the case of the Ark, the flood lasted 150 days. The Gilgamesh boat grounded on Mount Naimush, whereas the Ark grounded on Mount Ararat. In the Gilgamesh legend, the successive birds sent out to determine the subsiding floodwaters were a dove, a swallow, and a raven. In the Noachian story, the order is raven followed by 3 successive doves. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the flood victims were all turned to clay, whereas in Noah's flood story, they all drowned. But maybe this amounts to the same thing. The flood of the Gilgamesh saga ends in futile bickering between the gods over why Gilgamesh et al. Had been allowed to escape and the purpose of the flood in the first place. The parable of Noah's flood concludes with God's covenant with humanity. The Old Testament is generally agreed to have been written in the Babylonian exile of Israel. The first minuscule mention of Israel is on the Meneptah Stele from 1213 to 1203 BC. The Epic of Gilgamesh was sourced from a collection of stories and poems way back in 2100 BC. Now here is the question. What came first, the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Book of Genesis? Personally, I do not have the answer to this question, which is why I'm putting it out to you. I will love to read your opinions and perspectives in the comment section. What came first, the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Book of Genesis?